Welcome to the Notorious Scoundrels, a podcast focused on tactics and competitive play for Star Wars Legion. Hosted by Kyle Dornbos, Michael Barry, and David Zelenka, with Jay Shalansky, the man behind the glass.
Hello and welcome back to the Notorious Scoundrels podcast. I'm here with, as usual, Mike and David, and we also have a special guest, Luke Eddy. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here. I've made an arduous trek from the moon to be here.
How long did it take you to come down from the moon, out of curiosity?
It was like 7 minutes.
Wow.
That's a long commute.
Well, we appreciate you coming all the way down here to.
You should. You should.
I mean,
miles. It's a long journey.
The connection is much better now that he's closer.
Yes, that was the issue. We were having a connection problem, and that Earth to Moon, you get a leg, so it wasn't working.
So, Luke, I'm sure that most people know who you are already, but do you want to just briefly introduce yourself, maybe for some new listeners out there?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I started work at Fantasy Flight Games while Alex Davey was designing the Legion core set. And I helped with some of the finishing touches of that, and then have been designing expansions for Legion for, I'd say, what was the first one that came out? The first Battlefield pack, the one of the moisture evaporators, Bright Supplies. And ever since then, I've had a hand in each of the expansions that have come out for the game.
And you also do the rules reference and such, right?
This is true, although Alex and I do share the work on that, but I often get into the nitty-gritty of updating those, so which is something we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, so we're going to hit... we have a lot of things to talk about. There's
This is true.
Yeah, there's a lot of spicy new units that were previewed, and we'd love to hear from you about those. And then, of course, there was a gigantic rules reference update.
Yeah.
Which I think you wrote an article on, but it would also be helpful to hear about all of those things.
Absolutely.
So let's dive in.
Cool.
So we got a bunch of new unit previews on a very exciting stream just a couple of weeks ago. That would be Arcs, BX Droids, Cad Bane, and Padme Amidala.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to just talk about, I know Alex talked about them on the stream a little bit, especially with respect to the models and things like that. Do you want to just talk about sort of the the design philosophy behind each of these units and what you guys were going for as far as mechanics and how they play on the table? And
yeah, absolutely.
Maybe let's start with the commando style units first, the Arcs and the BX Droids.
Sure. Yeah. So it seems like people are excited for both of those, which is great. These are, I'm sure as everyone knows, these are the first Special Forces units for the new Clone Wars factions. And both of them sort of have some similarities with the first Special Forces units released for the original two factions, the Scout Troopers and the Rebel Commandos. But also, of course, they have some of the things that makes them unique for their respective factions. And Alex was the lead developer on these ones, and I think he did a good job of sort of combining those things. I think both of them feel really elite, which is cool. They feel, in some ways, more elite than the Rebel and Imperial ones. Obviously, you have ARC Troopers, and then the Commando battle droids are just such a huge step up from your normal battle droids, so they also feel much more elite than, any other unit in that faction thus far. That's not one of the commanders or a heavy. I think the design ethos for those was to sort of have have the options that the player has mechanically reflected in the options that they have to hobby them, and vice versa. So as you saw on stream, we highlighted the miniatures themselves a lot, and we had Corey DeVore there to one of our sculptors to talk about just the minis themselves. And so, like, you know, they highlighted how the commander droids have shields and swords, and those are both options that you can actually choose as assembly options when you're making the minis. And both of those cards make the unit operate in different ways. Plus, you have the two other heavy options for them. Alex mentioned there's the sniper, and then there's also the saboteur mini. So the units themselves have a lot of customizability, but also sort of like you can tailor them to what your preferences are or what role you're trying to have them fill. So they're meant to sort of be, they will sustain the special forces slot for those units in a sort of an expansive way. They're going to fill it in, you know, they'll fill that slot with a lot of different options just by nature of the options they have. So it's a good first unit for them to get. It gives them some, each of the factions long range capability, so they're more on parity with the Rebel and Imperial factions. It gives the Separatists, in particular, an area denial option with the Saboteur. They all can scout, so it gives them the ability to sort of like similarly move up and sort of advance that battle line at the start of the game. And then with the swords and shields option too, you can opt for more survivability, or you can sort of have one of the weaknesses that the Separatist faction has a little bit is that their only like brawler units or melee units are their two really expensive commanders. And so while the commander droids aren't really like a true dedicated melee unit, for pretty cheap, you can at least make them competent in that role and as sort of a tar pit unit. So it really opens up a lot of options for both of the factions.
So I wanted to also ask you about the ARC troopers. I don't know how much you can say, of course, but we've seen that Fives and Echo are going to make an appearance in that unit.
Yeah.
You want to talk about some of the new angles with the ARC troopers we saw in the article that was released, the one titled "To the Limit," that there are jetpacks coming, and we're actually going to have infantry now in the game that is not limited to just a hero. It's going to be on a full-fledged unit. So can you talk about some of the decisions there and how you think that's going to impact the game?
Yeah, well, both of these units, a lot of the mechanics were theme driven. So like we weren't not going to give ARC troopers jetpacks. Like they got to have those. And we'd always planned on Jump not being exclusive to heroes. It's just taken us time to get to adding those sorts of units for the game. And it's, you know, no surprise that the first faction that's getting them is, you know, the Republic, because I mean, you know, all the clones are based off of a Mandalorian, and Mandalorians love their jetpacks. So, you know, it's no surprise that sort of the elite clones would have that as a function. But yeah, so, you know, similar to how you can equip the commander droids with different options to sort of like fill out what you're trying to do with them, giving the clone troopers those jetpacks really enhance their mobility in a way that opens up options for them. They have a much more potent range 1 to 2 attack. And so having that mobility can definitely get them into places where they're able to sort of, you know, peak at what their damage output is. So that's good for them. And yeah, and then the Fives and Echo Mini, that was also definitely like we definitely wanted them in the game. And it's tough because there are so many cool characters in Star Wars. You know, there's a long list. You know, people have wish lists of what they want in the game. We do too, and we're trying to get to them. But you know, we can only put out so many things at a time. And so we've looked at different ways of how to include characters where we can. And I think what worked well was back when we did the Pathfinders, doing Pow and Biston as upgrades. And similarly, we've done C-3PO as a counterpart to R2-D2. And so with Fives and Echo, there's definitely a conversation about like, well, do we hold off and do them as operatives, or some sort of, maybe one is the counterpart of another? But we really weren't going to be able to fit that into our schedule anytime soon. And we really would rather have them in the game than potentially not for a very long time. And so we thought, well, this would be a great opportunity, because they do become ARC troopers, to include them as sort of that POW and Biston type upgrade, where you get the character into the game in that way. As Alex mentioned, they can go into normal clone trooper core units, so that's pretty cool. This is the first time we've sort of done that outside of like the specialist packs.
I love that, by the way, that you're able to do such a thing. I think that really kind of gives the clone player a lot of freedom, and I think as always, being able to build, what you want, how you want it, right, is kind of both the goal from the sculpting standpoint and from now the list building standpoint, because you've enabled them to do that with the new rules.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you're picking up on that, because that is something you're going to see in the future in other ways too, where as we sort of increase our capabilities as far as sculpting goes, we want to sort of reflect that in the miniatures as well, and or the mechanical capabilities as well, the customizable options there. And I think there's a lot of other ways in which we're going to open up sort of some list building options that in some respects, sometimes it's maybe not like, oh, this is like the most competitive way to run something, but it's a cool thematic choice. And so that's something you'll see more of in other ways as well.
Can you talk about, you alluded to a little bit, but of course you can see a lot of different weapon options for both the ARCs and the BX droids. Can you talk a little bit about like what we could potentially see there as far as weapon upgrades and stuff are concerned?
Sure, yeah. So for the BX droids, there's the swords and the shields as armament upgrades. And then for the heavy weapons, as I said, there'll be a sniper and there'll be a saboteur. For the ARC troopers, Fives and Echo are each a miniature, and they occupy that heavy weapon slot. There's also going to be a generic heavy weapon for that squad, so you don't necessarily have to run either Fives or Echo. I think Alex mentioned that on the stream about how Biston and POW are both good, but there isn't a generic heavy option for those units. It's not strictly necessary, but if someone, say, wanted to run 3 units of Pathfinders, there's not a heavy weapon option they could put on all 3. So giving you that sort of generic ARC Trooper heavy weapon, and actually I will say the generic weapon is their sniper. So you're not limited to just using, say, Echo as the sniper, though he is a better sniper than the generic heavy weapon you'll be getting. But you could run multiple units of them as snipers with that heavy weapon guy. And then as far as the armaments go, the only one they're getting is the jetpack. So it's not really adding a weapon per se, but it's adding or is that gear? Actually, never mind. I lied. That's gear. They don't have the armament slot, but they do have that gear as an option unique to them and Rex, which is kind of cool too, that he can take that.
Oh man, that's awesome that you can put that on Rex.
Yeah. It's he doesn't have it all the time, but there's definitely moments in the Clone Wars where like the 501st will be using jetpacks, and he's a part of that, obviously, and so he'll have one too. In the Clone Wars, you definitely see jetpacks as kind of a like, they're there if it serves the story. Kind of anyone can get a jetpack, I guess, if they submit the right paperwork. But more so ARC troopers. So that's who has it in Legion.
There's actually an episode where Obi-Wan gets a jetpack as I recall from the.
Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah, sometimes just the Jedi Force jump isn't quite enough.
Man.
Yeah,
What would that? That would give him what, like jump 3 or something? That'd be
it's multiplicative, of course,
Nice.
or additive.
Stacks like all of the keywords. Jump 3.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of characters, do you want to talk a little bit about Cad Bane?
Yeah, Cad Bane is definitely an exciting one. Speaking of the Clone Wars, there were. I know there's a lot of speculation about what operative would come up first for the Separatists, and Cad Bane won the raffle, so congrats to him. But he'll be fun. Yeah, he obviously has some similarities to existing bounty hunters, so I think it won't be a total surprise on how to play him. But he also has some wrinkles. For example, he does not have a jetpack, but he has little like rockets on his boots, so he doesn't get that speed bump that like Sabine and Boba have, or jump 2, but he has jump 1, which is useful. And then he still just has pistols, but he gets steady, which is, I don't think that's been on any unit other than the snowtroopers until now. So he sort of play, so he doesn't have a range 3, but performing an attack after moving is pretty great. So he plays, slightly differently, but not wildly differently than the other bounty hunters we've seen. So people will kind of know what to expect a little bit, but then of course he has some really wild command cards that will definitely make him play differently.
Can you talk about at least the one that was talked about on stream? I'm in control, the 2-pip.
Yeah, I can. In fact, I will bring it up. I will say, I don't want to spoil anything else, especially when there are pending marketing articles, but people have noticed that there were some tokens for him that had not been seen before, and I can say that those are a part of one of his command cards that does some fun things with a little bit of bluffing for players to get into.
And bluffing, that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, and if my computer will load any files, I'll pull up his 2-pip. Maybe I'll just Google it. I'm on a computer.
I mean, it's at this point you probably can Google it, right?
Yeah, actually, here I'll go to the. I do have bookmarked the Star Wars Legion Wikia. Let's see if they have it in here.
It's also pinned in the Discord.
Oh,
I don't know if that's easier.
That's true. I could go there. Come on, Cad Bane. Where are you?
In the meantime, can you talk about whether you are pro hat or anti hat?
I'm pro hat. Like, here's the thing. Here's the thing. Listen, as people have noticed, even on characters who don't necessarily have like multiple outfits they're wearing, we're giving you more options. And for Cad Bane, like, we're looking for ways to allow players to sort of customize that mini, and having a hatless thing is an option we're giving you, but I'm not advocating it as something you should necessarily do.
Yeah, is it really an option? Are you just giving
exactly? That's what I'm saying. It's a sort of it's a false sense of options, I guess. You got to give them the hat. Okay, I finally loaded the card here. At start and end of Cad Bane's activation, you transfer any number of his suppression tokens. Yes, to any number of trooper units that range 1 to 2. Yeah, this is mean. This is for sure. The suppression token thing, obviously, a lot of times there's not like a wild number of suppression tokens out. The point, though, is definitely the immobilized token. That's mainly what you're trying to do, because even just passing one suppression token triggers an immobilized token on that unit.
Well, and this is actually a little bit of something maybe we can talk about later with the RG, but the start of activation, that's explicitly now before his rally step, right?
Yes. Start is before his rally step. So he can get rid of those. Yeah, and it would be frustrating too if you had the suppression and you wanted to transfer it and you lost it because of your rally step. So yes, he can do that before he rallies.
So he could be like about to panic and just play this and then dish out, whatever 8 suppression to.
Oh, absolutely. He's got to be at that range 1 to 2 though, so he has to sort of put himself into that position. But yes, yeah, he can definitely do that.
That's awesome.
And that's not.
And what's nice. Oh, what were you saying?
No, that was not without some risk to do that. Is all I'm trying to say.
Exactly. Yes. Now, the other thing that's nice about this, and this is not that exciting, but if you're a Separatist player, it will be. Is that it is Cad Bane and 1 unit. So he's he's got a whole plan that involves some other people in this case. But having one of your operative cards still give a order to another unit is very helpful for those droid armies, because you can still get off your order chain.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that might be the only operative command card that does that besides Legacy of Mandalore. Yeah,
I think that is correct. Yeah, and that's her 3-pip, of course.
Yeah, as long as you don't count Luke and Vader, I guess, on that equation.
Well, yeah.
Right. I think, do any of their, operative, I'm doing scare quotes, you can't see me, but their operative cards issue another unit? I think they might all be themselves.
Yeah, they're all single.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of like their original ones.
Mm-hmm. It makes them special that way as operatives.
So Cad Bane sounds really sweet. Republic got a little bit of a new toy too in Padme, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah. I to sort of keep a bit of parity there between the 2 new factions, there's a lot of cool characters in the Clone Wars who would make great commanders. We wanted to keep a little parity there and pick a character who would make a good operative. And at the top of that list is definitely Padme. And there is definitely, she has a lot of interesting synergy going on in that faction. A lot of her stats seem, on paper, they're like, oh yeah, that's good. But then combining them with what's sort of going on in that faction just elevates them to another level. It's sort of an insubstantial there. In particular, like Alex mentioned, that she can, all friendly units in range of her can use her green tokens. And she has a way to issues that would normally be ordered to her, she can give them to another unit instead. So obviously that's going to help set up your fire support attacks. And then she herself is a great shot and has Sharpshooter 2, which is great for fire support attacks, as well as a surge to hit. And the upgrade card that we spelled for her does give her a range 1 to 3 option. So there's expensive stuff in that faction, but and she is not a commander, so you still have to work in a commander. But as sort of a support option, she'll do a lot of work.
Yeah, she seems very toolboxy, at least from what we've seen. So we've also seen a pretty crazy command card.
How about that?
Yeah, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yes, that is a lot. There's a lot of things going on at once in one command card, but those are things that you're going to see more of. So they are, sort of converging all at once on one command card, but some of these keywords are also going to show up on some of Cad Bane's, and they're being used in future things we're working on as well. This card in particular, Diplomatic Cover, that we're talking about, introduces 2 new keywords that are specifically command card keywords. So this is a new thing where it's a keyword on the command card that gives some sort of ability or effect to the card itself. In particular, I'll start at the second half of the card, Divulge. It is exactly the same effect as it was on Operative Vader's 3-pip, where you reveal the card at a certain step for an effect. So it's not a new concept, but it was something that after doing it once, we realized that we could get more mileage out of this and use it on other cards. And at that point, there was no reason not to sort of codify it as a keyword and start saving ourselves some text space, as well as like give it its own entry in the rules reference. So divulge deploy unit step then means, you would reveal this card to your opponent at the start of the specified step, the deploy unit step, for an effect. And then the other new keyword on there is permanent, which pretty simply just means that once the card is played, it's not discarded at the end of the round, like other command cards normally are. So by divulging the card at the start of the game, you're able to give Padme infiltrate, and then you're forced to play the card like the Vader one. And then when you go to actually playing the card, if it was divulged, she gains secret mission, so there's infiltrate and secret mission. If you didn't divulge it when you play it, she gains reliable one instead, which is the keyword we've seen on the Phase 2 clones, meaning she gets a surge token at the start of every round. And as mentioned earlier, friendly units can use her surge tokens. She's now like a walking surge token bank for people. So 2 different ways to play the same card. Again, giving players more options. There's a bit of complexity in it, but like I said, permanent is a thing we're going to see more of. And this divulge thing is essentially what we've already done with Vader, but also something you'll see more of as well.
Yeah, I really like that there's like kind of a dual option on this card where you're like, okay, if I don't want to do the infiltrate secret mission thing, I can be this really great support piece for my army. And I think that really kind of, you get to define Padme's role at the beginning of the game, it looks like, with this card. And that's really
cool. Definitely. And you can read the board and decide what you want to do. Not unlike the loadout keyword for Cassian and Iden, which lets you sideboard some cards. It sort of lets you make a decision. It's another turn 0 decision where you assess the board and decide what is the best way to play what I've already brought to the table. And you sort of modify how it's going to be played, what abilities it's going to have, or what upgrades are equipped to it.
Well, since you brought up Cassian, I would love to talk about him.
My boy Cassian.
Yeah, the article Covert Ops outlines some of the stuff we can expect both from Cassian and from Iden. So, like you just mentioned, you have the both the Covert Ops keyword and the loadout keywords, which, like you say, you read the board and then make a decision how you want to play, or maybe even in the list building step, how you want to use him. He's very much a multi-role kind of, pocket knife kind of guy, where he doesn't have he can be a lot of things for your army. And I think we should really talk about his marksman and some of the interactions between that and the sniper rifle, and then of course Crackshot with his ability to gain a standby token, and then potentially gets Gunslinger and standby from that really awesome 1-pip of his.
Yeah, so, 3 attacks if you can make it work.
Wouldn't it be even be 4 because he can Gunslinger?
Yes. I'm sorry. Yes, 4 because he still has Gunslinger when he makes the standby. Yeah, so 4. You could potentially do 4 attacks with it if it's set up perfect. That's the dream. We want to create these aspirational moments. Will you always get 4 shots out of that?
No.
Not. I mean, honestly, the standby is some nice sort of gravy there. It's interesting, and it was sort of a riff on like Obi-Wan's 1-pip, where he can take a standby, but it's at the start of his activation, it's before his 1-pip, so it's a little bit of insurance of like, was it a roll-off for the my 1-pip, or maybe you don't activate him first. Though if you played a 1-pip, you probably are going to. So Cassian and Iden sort of switch that up a little bit with, they sort of get a standby token as a bonus after their presumably, first activation of the whole of the round. But you're at least going to hopefully get Gunslinger off just on your normal activation attack. And if you have the sniper rifle, and that is 2, range 1 to infinite shots, which is pretty nice.
Yeah, he has. It's been noted that snipers took their sort of hit. They were reduced to range 5, and
Hmm.
a lot of folks were speculating that that was to make way for the reintroduction of infinite range cumbersome rifles on these two.
Actually, the way that these things sort of work out is that Cassian and Iden were designed at the same time as the existing, or the old, I should say, infinite range sniper rifles. Now, if you look at especially Iden's, it bears a lot of similarities to those rifles, and there was some concern about introducing another infinite range sniper rifle with a different rank. So we tried to sort of change how you play with that rifle a little bit, and that was mainly through the marksman keyword, where you have a very accurate rifle, but you've sort of capped a little bit like the upper limit of how much damage output you're going to do, because they don't actually have sharpshooter. So you can't get into a situation where, with light or no cover, if they have heavy, really, you're probably only going to get one crit through with them, but it's very consistently one crit through to do 1 damage with that pierce. Now, the original infinite range sniper rifles were being changed to range 5 while we were working on the strike teams, the ARC Trooper and the Commander Droid strike teams for the new factions. So that was actually the timeline going on there, where we were like, all right, if these are going to change, we need to consider this change now. And we have to decide what change we're going to make, because that will have an impact on the design of the snipers for the new factions. So both Cassian and Iden were initially designed, sort of like with the existence of those infinite range snipers in play. And we tried to do what we could to sort of, mitigate what would be, 4 possible infinite range snipers at once. But I think the outcome that we got was even better, where we looked at then toning down the range of just sort of the generic ones, the commandos and the scout troopers. And then at that point, it really made Cassian and Iden shine as the only true infinite range snipers. And I think that's appropriate too, because they're main characters, or they're unique, commander characters. And you only can have one of them in a given army.
I'm also really digging the theme here, because I noticed that Cassian has Danger Sense 3, just like Jin with Danger Sense 4, just like Paths with Danger Sense 3. So you can have a Danger Sense army is now very possible with this release.
It's true. Yep. Yeah, we sort of try and keep some of that mechanical theme with units that sort of appear together. So, I thought it would be weird if Cassian didn't have it, after sort of, again, that's the theme of the other Rogue One Rebel characters that we've had thus far. He's not quite as good as Duckin as Jin is. She has Danger Sense 4. He's got 3, but it's as good as any of the other Pathfinders.
Yeah.
It certainly helps in a sniper battle too, because the snipers usually, again, is just sort of narrowly trying to get some hits in and piercing that one block. But if you can roll a couple extra defense dice, it really throws the math out of whack.
Right. It's like I like to call it a pseudo impervious.
Mm-hmm. And I think, and that was a little bit of our, again, how I mentioned we were doing the change to the original snipers at the same time as the designing the ones for the new faction, and not at the same time as working on Cassian and Iden. But we knew that even if that didn't change, though, with Cassian and Iden, they were going to be sort of natural predators to the scout and commando snipers, because they'll win that duel, even if they both had infinite range. Cassian and Iden, I mean, you have 6 wounds on a character versus, 1 per mini with 2 minis, plus Danger Sense. And Iden's droid also helps her out droid, you've seen the spread of the tokens, and there's a shield token in there. So her little Dio will grant her a shield token, and that's real annoying to try and work through as a sniper if you're trying to have sort of a sniper war with her.
Yeah, I'm super looking forward to all of that, and as you mentioned, like I'm with the sort of a semi-reliable, critical hit. Cassian and Iden become kind of these kind of arch snipers, where they can hunt down other strike teams and basically beat them at their own game, kind of.
Exactly. It's certainly more interesting too to spend aim tokens in that way. Similarly, I know Alex mentioned that the snipers for the new factions are also going to play with the aim tokens slightly differently. They have a new keyword called lethal, where they have to spend the aim token to gain Pierce 1 on their weapon, 1 aim token for Pierce 1, up to a maximum of 1, so not more than that. But they have to choose to spend that aim token to gain that Pierce, and not on the reroll. So they also sort of play with that a little bit differently.
So as far as Iden and Cassian go, clearly their sniper rifles are upgrades to their unit cards. Do you expect them to be equipped with those most of the time? Do you feel like, was that the main role you guys had in mind for them when you designed them?
Yes and no. That was definitely a role that we were giving them to fill. But both of them have another option for a gun as well. Iden has I think it's the TL50, which is just a mean range 1 to 3 dice or a gun with a bunch of dice. So she can also just fill sort of a regular gunline role as well, without necessarily having to be a sniper. And then Cassian as well, his rifle is a double-sided card. It has a config, or it is a config. And so flipping it over gives him a different version of that gun, leaves his cumbersome, and he's now able to, he has tactical on his card, which obviously you can't use while you have the cumbersome sniper rifle. But without cumbersome, that tactical then comes into play. And so when you move away from sniping, he becomes sort of a run and gun guy who does actually want to get up and close, close and personal. So I think both of them actually hopefully have two very different ways that you could play them. But what's cool, because of the loadout keyword, and also because Cassian's weapon can be reconfigured, is you can sort of adapt them to the role that you need them to fill, like in that particular game. Do you need them to sit back and be the sniper? Okay, they can do that. Do you need to have them move up? Do they need to be like your objective securer? You can do that with them instead on the fly in that game.
That's awesome. I mean, I think, we saw it a little bit with the Padme's command card that you just described there, but these kind of heroes with dual capabilities, where you kind of at the beginning of the game get to decide how they're going to interact with the game state, present some really interesting choices to players.
Yeah, it's cool. And that came out of a conversation with Frank Brooks, who works on X-Wing. And we were talking about, okay, so Iden she's from a video game. She's the character you play in a first-person shooter in Battlefront 2. What can you do in a minis game that sort of is evocative of that? And in particular, to like how she plays in Battlefront. And one of the things that you can do in that game is when you reach a checkpoint or find a crate in game in the single player mission, you can completely change what your equipped abilities and weapons are. And so out of that, out of that sort of gameplay choice in the video game, we're like, okay, well, how could you sort of do that in a minis game? And it's like, well, they have upgrade cards. You could do some sort of sideboarding. It makes sense for her to have different weapon options anyways, because we want to do multiple miniature poses for her, and she uses a lot of different weapons. So it just sort of naturally grew out of that. And then it was just sort of serendipitous that it worked just as well for Cassian too, who you actually literally see in Rogue One, like before getting off his U-wing, like repacking his bag and changing the configuration of his gun. So it just was a natural fit for both of those characters. And while it does add some more complexity to playing those characters into the game, there's definitely space in the original factions now to appeal to sort of a more sort of, not necessarily like, not purely a more complex level of play, but, as people are more familiar with those original factions, we can do mechanics like this that require more, a little more mental overhead, but out of it, you get some more interesting options for the players, more interesting decisions for them to make.
And I think you just alluded to it, but it's not just for loadout, is not just for weapons. You can also do like training upgrades and stuff.
Exactly. Yes. You can create a whole branch of a lot of decisions you had to make depending on how many upgrades you want to start equipped to them.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I think we want to move on to the RRG because there's a lot to talk about in there.
Yes, there's a lot of blue text in that document, huh?
Yeah, I can't actually remember an RRG update that had more blue text than this one.
Yeah, we just went through and there'd been a lot in there that was sort of bugging me that we hadn't gotten, just things that could have been worded better, some quality of life things. And it just sort of became like we're just going to go in and clean up whatever looks like it needs to be cleaned up. And so there's definitely a lot of sections in there that really they didn't change in how they function, but the wording is clear. Some things clarified a little better. There were some places where just the wording between, two different entries talking about the same thing, neither of them were wrong, but they were using different wording. And it was like, well, let's just change those so that they're the same. So there's a lot of that going on, which creates a lot of blue text. Hence, the article that we put out to sort of highlight some of the things, like the more meaningful changes that were in there. And that's something we definitely want to keep doing in the future too, is, sort of release an article to accompany an update to the rules reference guide. I know in some of the video and computer games I play, I appreciate when there are patch notes that developers put out. So it's that same sort of thing.
So in the article, you clearly highlighted Tauntauns and Shore Troopers.
Those Tauntauns and Shore Troopers, man.
Do you want to talk a little bit about kind of what went into the thought process behind those changes?
Yeah, absolutely. I as you said, I do sort of allude to like the nature of those changes. I think something I want to reiterate for people is like, this is not like, here's your balance change, one and done. No more balance changes to Tauntauns and Shore Troopers. No, we're as I said, going to keep an eye on them. They're definitely something we're going to look at when we do points changes. But also to be a little more specific, I guess, we didn't want to change them drastically before Worlds. Because Worlds is kind of a culmination of a season. So there are definitely some balance changes to them that we are considering and that we're going to do some more testing on. But in the meantime, we did want to do something about an aspect of each of them that we felt was beyond sort of just rebalancing them and addressing something that was just not an ideal rules interaction or component interaction. And so, if you've read the update or read the article, that it's not actually shore troopers or their mortars that were changed, but there was an errata to comms relay such that emplacements can't take them. The ramifications of which are that the mortars themselves can't take that and, kick off an order chain once they're given an order and end up with orders on all of your shore troopers and hence aim tokens on all of your shore troopers. It was just something that was it was something we knew. I mentioned this. We knew you could do in testing, but it seemed like it would be more work to set up than it was necessarily worth. You had to dedicate a lot of what you're doing to it. But clearly, at a competitive level, it's achievable, and the efficiency that you get out of it is via the aim tokens and also the order tokens was worth it. And but it's sort of the thing where, like, if you were to go to an event and you are, say, newer to competitive Legion, and someone has this setup and they just start, chaining these orders and getting all these aim tokens and able to do it round after round, that doesn't feel good. It feels like you got tricked a little bit and there was an interaction that you didn't expect to happen. We certainly include combos, card combos in Legion, various synergies, but they're all supposed to be relatively transparent. They either have a thematic tie-in or they came together in the same product. And so it's not really like a surprise or a gotcha when something works the way it does. So it was something, we decided to change, and, definitely tamps down on the overall efficiency of the shore trooper list that were using that combo.
Can you talk about the changes also in that same vein to Tauntauns?
Yeah, absolutely. Similarly, it was something that, is less so about sort of changing the efficiency of the unit via, say, changing a keyword, changing a stat, something like that, and more about we just, once they had gotten out in the wild, so to speak, and people were playing them, it was something that that didn't feel good to play against. It didn't feel like it should work like that. It seemed too easy for the player running the Tauntauns. And just, bouncing between units without any ramifications just meant you could keep getting ram off against other units, staying engaged in combat so that you're not really ever shot at, and just generating, again, too much efficiency, but also sort of an NPE or a negative player experience for your opponent. And it was interesting because the creature trooper rules we definitely went back and forth on a lot in testing, but the main thing that was contentious while we were testing them was how cover worked with them. The whole whether they got cover from suppression tokens or not, whether they could be shot at or not when they were engaged, whether they even were considered engaged or not. And so there's I like where all of that ended up, but unfortunately, what didn't get quite enough attention probably was the nature of them, exiting combat freely. It was always the intent that they're not like, we wouldn't want like a Tauntaun unit to just totally get neutered by a, upgrade list 40-point squad of rebel troopers that just runs up and, touches them with their base. Now Tauntauns are like, stuck and they're no good anymore. So, we still wanted to give them some sort of, ability to, first of all, displace minis that they're engaged with. But second of all, be better at withdrawing than other units. But just being able to freely move out with no ramifications just proved to be the wrong decision. So we're walking back on that and giving them the restriction of having to use their whole activation and move at speed 1. But along with emplacements, they will get to do free actions, which solves some other issues with the emplacements of not being able to get out of melees because they're not able to reposition. But then also lets the Tauntauns still be a little better in those situations where it withdraws, in that if it can get into melee, it can trigger a melee attack, or it can shoot because of Relentless after doing the withdraw.
Just a little bit of an extension of that. Essentially, they can't ram anymore when withdrawing.
Exactly. Yep, because they're the withdraw is a speed 1 move. It doesn't affect their maximum speed, which is still 3, and thus the requirements for ram are not fulfilled, and they don't get that extra efficiency out of their melee attack. And it also just tamps down on their range. That's the biggest thing too. Moving out of combat at range 3 with the freedom to do another free move or another move is, that's their normal distance, but being reduced to 1 speed 1 move really cuts down on the distance they can travel going out of a melee.
So another sort of like ninja change to creature troopers in here is that they can no longer climb and clamber.
Yes, that's true. That's that is a bit of a ninja change. You're right. I mean, I mentioned in the article, so it's not a secret. Yeah. But yes, and that was, and again, it's a little tweak to them too. It's not super. It's certainly not as drastic as the change to withdrawing. But that was as much of a sort of a way to do a little bit of rebalancing as it was to just make some of these movement rules a bit easier to remember. We already knew we were going to change emplacements to be able to reverse, because again, they'd sometimes get into weird situations, and they might as well be able to. It's not some huge balance issue if they suddenly can. And then in that respect, then the only difference between creatures and emplacements movements would have been that the creatures can climb and the emplacements can't. And we were like, let's just do that as well, make them as close as possible. It's not like either the Tauntaun or the Dewback were in Star Wars lore notorious for, climbing over things. So if in the future there is some sort of creature who, is meant to, scrabble over terrain and stuff, then they'll have some sort of keyword for that.
I'm going to be excited to see the first time someone uses Vader's might to just launch a Tauntaun on top of a building.
Yeah, no, there's definitely some shenanigans with that card, and they will come up. But I guess keep your Tauntauns away from Vader.
It seems reasonable, right?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Yeah, definitely.
Something's got to be good against Tauntauns, right?
Anyway,
Yeah. If anyone's going to be good against Tauntauns.
Yeah. So Luke Eddy Moon Ninja is what I'm going to start calling you.
I'm fine with that.
So speaking of things you've ninja'd, Secret Mission has changed a little bit in this rules update. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, Secret Mission and Bounty no longer interact. They're just completely separate. No touching. It's the rule.
I fully support that decision.
Yeah, it was one of those that, people who follow the rulings that are posted in the FFG forums and clarifications on things, that's sort of a stopgap between being able to update the rules reference, because updating the rules reference is it's involved. It's there's a whole document with images and text flow, and it has to go through approvals and translation and various things. So we generally only do that along with the release of new units whose keywords aren't in there yet. So that online forum is a good sort of stopgap for us. But in there was a clarification saying that they do interact. Because at the time, he had to pick one or the other that needed an answer. But after seeing people's responses on, whether they liked that or not, I think it was, sort of both from I think what, players would rather see, and from the perspective of again, not wanting to have these sort of surprise interactions that someone with less experience doesn't expect. It was something that, I think we wanted to change.
Yeah, and it also,
I suppose, should I say exactly what it is? The thing is just that if you put a bounty token on a unit with secret mission, the secret mission unit can't be like, oh, I have a victory token now. I fulfilled the requirements of secret mission. You didn't. You have to perform the secret mission action. And there are some other weird ways too in which they might interact, and we just said no. And interesting too, actually. Oh, so here, this is an actual ninja stealth change. Is that bounty and bounty, two bounty keywords, no longer interact with each other. So if I steal, if I get a bounty, say I'm Bosk, me personally, Luke Eddy is now Bosk, and I kill my quarry, and I get a victory token on myself. My opponent then, who let's say has Boba Fett, under the old wording of the rules reference, if that Boba Fett killed me, Bosk, while I had a bounty token, that Boba Fett would get the token. I keep saying bounty token, I mean victory token.
Sure.
That now no longer would happen because that victory token was not placed on Bosk due to the bounty keyword at the beginning of the game. So that token would just be lost.
No bounty.
So no more. Exactly. No more stealing. No more stealing bounties from each other. No more R2D2 cashing in on a bounty for himself, whatever that was.
So just to clarify that a little bit, I didn't notice this change, and I'm looking at the rules reference guide right now and being like, oh, he's right.
Yeah.
So, but what that does not preclude you from doing is, say, having Boba and Bosk in the same list and having multiple bounty targets. They still can cash in on either.
Correct. The bounty keyword, when checking whether the token transfers, doesn't care whether it was the bounty keyword that put that particular victory token on. All it cares about is whether that victory token was placed on a unit at setup because of a bounty keyword. So yes, you could still have Bosk and Boba in the same list. They each pick a different bounty target. It doesn't matter of which of them kills which.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like we need some red and blue player bounty tokens or victory tokens.
Yeah, I think it's generally I mean, it's the sort of thing where, if I killed your unit and got the bounty and transferred it to my bounty hunter, yes, hypothetically, there might be a memory issue there, but you're usually going to be able to remember, it's because, exactly. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe a couple. Maybe I'll talk to OP. Maybe get some fancy bounty tokens.
That would be sweet. Love it,
kid. Yeah.
I mean, that'd be cool to just be able to throw a bounty token down on the table and be like, "I'm bountying you."
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
So, two more changes in there that we wanted to ask about, sort of related to just mechanically how the game is played. The first is the changes to pre-measuring.
Yeah.
So now you can explicitly only use. It's not quite as restrictive as the a one tool at a time rule from, I think that's Armada.
Yeah, that's an Armada rule.
But you can use one movement tool and one range ruler at a time, but not multiple range rulers and or multiple movement tools.
Correct. Yeah, and that was sort of a compromise between the sort of new level of leniency we were granting by being able to use a movement tool at any time. We felt like we had to give it some sort of limit, because by opening up, you can also use movement tools. A player could, with nothing saying otherwise, get out two different range rulers, multiple movement tools, and sort of try, figure out the perfect, lay them out on the table and figure out the perfect position. And at that point, it's nah, don't do that. We want you to pre-measure, but that sort of level of perfection and also really just, slowing down game time is not what we wanted. Now, it's a rule we could change in the future, but we wanted to put some sort of cap on it so that it wasn't ambiguous, like to what extent could I use multiple tools at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, you just have high-level players doing trigonometry at the table, right? Like, it's just like...
Exactly.
I mean, I've seen people do that, in casual games all the time. They put, 3 different range rulers down on the table, and they're trying to figure out exactly where they can go to, not trigger a standby or something.
Yeah, and you know what? In your casual games, that's fine. Go ahead and use 2 sticks at the same time to, double check. But at your tournament level games, just stick to 1 at a time just so you don't slow things down too much.
And someone who's sort of anal about triangulation, I love this change.
Oh, okay, good.
from a speed of play perspective.
Because Kyle will sit there figuring out exactly where his piece needs to go, so everybody.
Doing actual trigonometry.
Yeah.
I'm sure people have seen me, do that.
I have a lot of experience with this. So I did have a question in regards to the ability now to use movement tools outside of the unit's activation. Do you guys have any concerns about bumps and stuff like that happening more frequently?
Well, funny you should ask. There's a whole margin of error section in the rules now. No, you do raise a good point, and I think it's not really something you can avoid. And I think as players, it'll happen in tournaments. It'll happen in casual games. The more familiar you are with a minis game and using the tools in the game, the less often you'll bump things. It helps hold down the base of the mini when you put the movement tool next to them. Whatever little bit of extra sort of imperfection you might be introducing via perhaps bumping units more often, I think is more than offset by the ability to have sort of a freer pre-measuring restrictions in the game.
I actually don't have that particular section in front of me, but can you do that? Can you also use movement tools on your opponent's units or just your own?
I don't know if I have the section up either, but I believe you can use the movement tools on your opponent's unit. Just, be nice about it.
Yeah.
Make your intentions clear, and perhaps ask them, if they could do the measurement for you if you think they might be particular about it.
Yeah, that's always a good practice. Even when I'm using range rulers against opponents' units, I'll do something like that.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, if you're really familiar with the range tools as well, you can sort of tell what speed of movement is going to be just from the range ruler too.
Yeah.
So if you don't necessarily even need to use the movement template, then you don't worry about it.
Yeah, I think just for, probably just muscle memory, I'm going to personally probably keep using the range ruler to measure movement.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I'm sure there will be situations, where it's beneficial to throw that actual movement tool down.
Right, when you're trying to get just a millimeter away from an objective token, then you probably want to use that movement tool.
Well, it's also important to note though that you have another section in here basically that says when you pick up, I think it's actually in the same thing, when you pick up a mini, you've committed to performing the move. So if you do actually pick up the miniature, then yes, you are moving with it. Yeah. So even just using the movement tool is not going to be a perfect measure simply because you're not able to put the width of the unit's base in there to see.
Correct. You still have the width of the base at the end of the movement tool. Yep.
Do you want to talk about margin of error real quick?
Sure. Yeah, we can talk about that a bit. It's a long section, but it's actually yes, it is. It is a whole page. It's a long section, but it's mostly just sort of examples. And this is actually sort of the main thrust of this was taken from the tournament regulations, which also has a much shorter but similar margin of error section. Just about how, like, this. I mean, the main point is that the physicality of a miniatures game itself just entails that there's going to be some imprecision, and as you said, some you might bump something, or place something, sort of push it a little bit when you move it accidentally, or when you lift up your hand, even it might catch just a little bit and change by a millimeter or more. But so that's just. It was something that had always been in the tournament regulations. That was something I thought is not necessarily exclusive to tournament play, and the rules reference itself, which many more players read than the tournament regulations. The tournament regulations are intended mostly for tournament organizers, but it's something that more players, I thought, could benefit from reading and just sort of having it codified into the game itself, in the regular, the game rules of the rules reference, rather than just living in the tournament regulations. So the main thrust of it is just about hey, it's a physical game. And then it goes on, though, with a bunch of examples about how the minis themselves, the part that's not on the base, is not meant to sort of impede certain mechanical aspects of the game. And I guess what's not explicitly stated here, but what is definitely an intent, is we don't want to hamper the hobby side of Legion. Legion is very much a hobby game, and some people will take the miniatures and add to them or convert them, and change the way they're posed or what they're doing on their base. And we didn't want that to have a detrimental effect on playing the game itself. So having to explain how to sort of ignore the miniature while playing a miniatures game, took a bit of text and some examples, but sort of the intent of that is to not have the cool factor of the mini itself get in the way of the mechanics of the game.
Yeah, I think that's really important, just to kind of make it, I don't know, just not terrible to have to finically put everything back to where it needs to go every time. So in kind of the spirit of margin of error, Alex had mentioned on one of the previous streams recently.
Oh, you going to ask about silhouettes?
I'm going to ask about silhouettes. Yeah.
Oh, man.
So
I read your mind.
It's like we didn't talk about this beforehand.
It's like you didn't have a list of what you wanted to talk about ahead of time.
Right.
Yeah.
So it would be great, I guess, if you could talk about that in any capacity that you can talk about that. And I guess also maybe define kind of the time frame to whatever extent you can when we can expect that change.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not something that's out, so I don't want to go into too much detail, but I do think I'd be happy to offer some more clarity for people. It has been something that has come up a number of times. The reason it's not something you've seen yet is because we decided that as I was saying about, sort of the margin of error that, that can live in just the rules itself. We decided that this is something, though, that we want to live in the tournament regulations for Legion. We decided it's not something that was crucial for just your sort of standard casual game night or friend's house play. If you're doing that, don't worry about this. You don't need to add another layer to what you're already doing for miniature line of sight. Now, if you are a competitive player, though, and if you're familiar with any other games that have silhouettes, this is something that I think will be an improvement to your gameplay. Just for the clarity of people who maybe don't know how it works, silhouettes in minis games is you might have a little cardboard cutout, and it's the sort of standard size of what a miniature would be. And when you check line of sight to something that has that size, or is because of their base size or whatever, is supposed to use that silhouette, you put that little piece of paper, that little cardboard standee, in place of or behind the miniature. And instead of having to figure out, oh, can I see like part of this miniature? Can I see his gun sticking out? Can I see its, some part of the physical miniature itself? You just need to see the piece of paper, the silhouette, the little cardboard piece behind it. And it's something that, as we said, we're going to introduce to Legion. We're going to introduce it to the competitive tournament play, though. And I'll say it's something that is only going to be for standard non-emplacement, non-trooper, or non-creature troopers. So only things on that small 27 millimeter base will use it. All the other vehicles and creatures and things will just line of sight as they always have. But as you mentioned, the connection with the margin of error thing is that this is intended to allow players more freedom in their hobbying, not have to worry about, oh, I sculpted some, awesome flame jet coming out of my snow trooper, flame trooper, and now when I'm standing next to a building, it sticks out and I can be shot at. So it's going to open up more freedom there. And as people saw on the stream, you're getting more troopers on flight stands, and under the old line of sight rules, that's really more of that's a disadvantage being up on that, but it looks really cool. So you still want to do it. So exactly, with the introduction of the silhouettes, then that will alleviate that problem.
I mean, I think that's a great change. As soon as I saw the ARC Troopers, and this was before silhouettes got talked about, I was like, well, I'll put the jetpack upgrade on them, but I'm definitely not putting them on flight stands ever, because that just doesn't, it wouldn't have made sense to do that
exactly. Yeah.
So I think that this change is great. Cool. I think that's a pretty awesome answer. I'm loving that.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, have you guys played any games that use the silhouettes at all?
No. Normally, I'm shooting Luke's lightsaber from. I can see the tip of it over some crates. Example. And I'm like, oh yeah, you thought he was in heavy cover, but I got the tip of his lightsaber, so sorry.
Mm-hmm. That's a good example of something that we are going to curtail with this.
The Wookiee unit leader is also now very excited that he can proudly hold.
Yeah, holding that sword up above his head. Now there will be some minis who don't like it. Those kneeling snipers. They just got a little taller. But
Fair.
I think that is what it is. I think it's definitely going to benefit a lot more units, and especially hobbied units or minis, I should say, than have a negative impact.
So I know that we didn't talk about this question ahead of time, so please feel free to tell me to take a hike.
No, by all means.
Should we expect some sort of product to be associated with these silhouette, cutouts or whatever they're going to be?
No, so there won't be a product for them. It's not something that we wanted to. Well, it's certainly not something that we wanted gated behind a product you have to buy. Is this something we could potentially see in a product down the line? Say as a piece of cardboard punch, that's certainly a possibility. Maybe as an OP prize, something like that. But we are going to provide we'll provide the exact dimensions, and we're going to provide a printable cutout online. So you'll be able to get it from the website. It'll print out exactly the size it's supposed to be, and you can just cut it out. And then from there, if you want to say glue it to cardstock, or once you have the specifications, say cut it out of something else yourself, laser cut it out of something, you'd be more than welcome to do so.
Awesome. I think that sounds like a very reasonable way to do it. Do you expect these changes to be in effect at Worlds, or is this probably
no? So that's something else I could offer some clarity on. We've had discussions about whether or not it should be, and there was period in which, hypothetically we could have introduced this for Worlds, but we made the decision that with the update to the rules reference that we just got, we feel like that was enough of a change already. And as I mentioned before, Worlds is sort of like the culmination of a season. Would be like changing the rules of football right before the Super Bowl, sort of thing. It's like, well, we still want to improve a few things with this rules reference update, but we made a decision to hold off on any tournament regulation updates until after Worlds. And now I will say that was not just because of the silhouettes, but the other thing that's also been mentioned a few times is a change from strength of schedule to margin of victory for tournaments. And that is something we've been working on, and something that, along with the silhouettes, will be in an update to the tournament regulations. But even more so than the silhouettes, changing how you calculate tiebreakers was something that, even though we are excited about changing it and we think we have a good alternative to strength of schedule, was not something we wanted to introduce, like right before the biggest tournament of the season for the game.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Since it's kind of like the closeout of the the last year of competitive Legion. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, and yes, players will have to change some lists based on the update to the rules reference. For anyone going in with Tauntauns, they don't necessarily have to change their list, but they may have to, change how they play. They'll have to have some new rules in mind for Imperial players running short troopers. If they were doing like a comms relay, order chaining, then yes, they obviously have to change their list because the mortars can't take those anymore. But short troopers themselves are still viable, so it's not a drastic change. So there will be some changes, some things to take into consideration, but like you said, it's not really anything wildly different than what people have been playing up to this point. And so it is still sort of a reflection of like, this is, again, sort of like the capstone of, this last, the meta we've had leading up to this point.
So in the RRG are also a lot of brand new keywords that we haven't seen before.
This is true.
A lot of those new keywords appear to relate to the Vital Assets expansion.
This is correct. Yes, keywords and new types of cards and new miniatures even.
Yeah, so do you want to just talk about Vital Assets? It's this is the first time since Priority Supplies that we're getting any sort of new objectives. So
I know, right? We should have done this sooner.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it sort of seems like it's coinciding with the end of a season, which I think is kind of cool.
Yes, as we keep mentioning, yeah, it does. It works out. It works out nicely that way. It's we had. I might have mentioned this before on one of our live streams that we had always planned on doing another pack of upgrades, and it sort of got pushed out because of introducing the new factions. And so we were like, well, we got to make room in our schedule for what is, a massive chunk of new units of, the groundwork for 2 new factions. And so, Vital Assets got pushed out a bit, but it is coming out. And unlike the first one, which had 1 of each card, this will add 3 of each card, which will be definitely exciting. And now you're up to 8 possible cards in each category. 3 of each, yeah.
Yep.
So some of the cards, I think I was checking ahead of time to see what had been in articles or already spoiled in the stream, or had most of their mechanics shown in the rules reference. And so I think at this point, people figured out that of the 3 objectives, there's one that is the hostage exchange, one that is a payload that uses the bomb carts, and then one that is a bombing run that uses the bomb or mine miniatures themselves, and they're all pretty wacky, pretty different. We definitely when we were working on this, there was a kind of our MO was that we weren't going to plan on all of them being competitively viable, but if they ended up being that way, then great. We were fully prepared to choose several of these to be like, hey, these are casual play only. But then we're pleasantly surprised when through testing, we even though some of them were kind of like, outside of the box ideas, that they got to the point where they were refined enough that we felt like these are all perfectly good candidates for, being a part of the regular battle card pool. So it's definitely going to shake things up for sure. Having that many new ones, especially the objectives, but even the conditions and the deployments themselves too are going to shake things up a bit. The one deployment that hasn't been spoiled is actually the weirdest of all of them. So that'll be a fun surprise.
This guy.
You're just gonna
teasing
drop
us.
that.
Right?
Yeah, I'm just gonna drop that. You can deal with it. It's weird, guys.
Can you talk?
I'll say this about it. So the ones that have been spoiled is the Alex showed off the one called Rollout that has some text on the bottom that is sort of like it's a further, if I remember right, it's a further away long march, but any vehicles get to deploy closer. So it directly benefits vehicles. And then the other one, the Danger Close one that you can kind of see in the article, is like kind of a riff on what is the one from the first party supplies pack where you get to deploy out a little further. I'm blanking on the name.
Yeah, it's Advanced Positions.
Advanced Positions, right? Yes, where it's along the edges of the board. This is a riff on that, where even more of the board is covered by, the edge of the board is covered by deployment zones. And then the last one, so you got one that's kind of like a riff on Long March. You got one that's kind of a riff on that advanced positions. And then the last one that people haven't seen yet is a variation on battle lines. And so in testing, before we had a good name for it, it was called I Can't Believe It's Not Battle Lines. So if people want to go ahead and keep calling it that, that's fine by me when it comes out. You'll see.
I will definitely be calling it that. That's pretty awesome. Can you talk just specifically about each of the objectives and kind of like what they do and maybe how folks should expect them to play out a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. People have seen the full text for hostage exchange, so I think people have already started thinking about how that one's going to play out. That one is definitely sort of a it's a narrow way victory condition in that it's kind of all or nothing. You can, one player is probably going to get their hostage back to their side or just keep it and the other won't. So there's not a lot of margin for error on that one. It's definitely doing some interesting things too. We had to come up with some interesting sort of ways to get all of the game text necessary for it to function available. There's the hostage cards themselves that modify the unit that has the objective token, the hostage, essentially. And there's some other things too, where like, the round one things can't use detonate. That came directly out of testing of people just, running in. They couldn't, the hostage carriers couldn't be attacked round one, and very quickly people realized, well, what if I just run up and throw a bunch of bombs at them? So can't do that either.
That seems like
it doesn't work.
Bad faith hostage exchange anyway.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, this is clearly a hostage exchange gone wrong. Like after round one, a lot of shooting breaks out. Something didn't go right here. That one will be, I think that will definitely, players will have to play that one carefully because like a lot of the upgrade or a lot of the objective cards are sort of come down to like, oh, there's one objective that matters. It's the key position in the center, or it's the crate or the supplies in the center that you're fighting over. But with this one, sort of like it's sort of a razor's edge of you just you have to concentrate on both objective tokens at once. So that one will be interesting, and it does sort of force, not unlike those other ones I mentioned, it does sort of force engagement in the center of the board. Which and has some interesting sort of like where the two units are sort of the two units carrying the hostages start closer to their opponent's side than to the side of the player that owns them. So they sort of pass past each, they move past each other a little bit there in the beginning of the round or the first turn. So they end up sort of meeting in the middle, and that's where most of the fighting breaks out. So yeah, fight over the middle of the board in that one primarily. For payload, I think is the one that people have seen the least of, but the rules for the bomb cart is in the rules reference. So I think people sort of have an idea of how that one works, where each side has a bomb cart. They're trying to have more of their units near that cart than their opponent, and doing so causes the bomb cart to move. And you're trying to get the bomb cart to the other side of the board. And if you do, you get more victory points. Presumably it blows up when you get there.
That's very reminiscent of like a lot of like video game, like Dota-esque.
Well, I would say, yes, actually. And in fact, Frank Brooks, who I mentioned earlier, also helped with the design on these battle cards specifically. And Frank and I are both TF2 players, and there was no question that we're going to try and put payload into Legion. It is just literally TF2 payload.
Fair enough.
I mean, there's a reason it's a mission in video games like that, right? Is because it sort of forces you to fight over a specific area and then push.
Oh yeah, exactly. Now, in TF2, I will say I usually prefer the offense-defense payload maps, upward being the best of them. But in order to keep things, we weren't going to do something truly asymmetrical for like a regular, that's more sort of what we do in the scenarios. So this is one where both players have a bomb cart. So what ends up happening in this one too is similar to the hostage exchange one, while not necessarily the middle of the board, because of the way things can shake out, there's inevitably going to be a point where the two carts are going to move near each other, and that's going to be a conflict zone. There can be a couple turns where each team sort of clumps around their own cart to get it moving, but don't actually like engage until the carts themselves sort of converge at a point where they sort of have to cross each other's paths.
Yeah, this also, the way you're describing it makes it sound like saboteurs probably have a little bit of play here, and like making it so that your opponent's minecart can only go certain places or whatever. Otherwise, it blows up all your...
Well, and what's interesting too is the carts move at a decent clip. They move speed 2 each round, but in order at the end, you're going to each side is going to gain victory points relative to sort of how far their cart got. So by choosing a longer route, you're actually sort of risking winning the game. And so you honestly might just plow headfirst into a whole bunch of charge tokens if that's the closest route to where you need to go. So certainly potential for some carnage in payload.
Speaking of bombs, do you want to talk about the last objective real quick?
Yeah, speaking of bombs that actually blow up, this one, bombing run, I'm going to have to say here, I don't actually know how much of this one has been spoiled. I think maybe Alex showed this one on the stream, so people have seen that Similar to Minefield, it has a weapon profile on the bottom of the cart for an area attack when the bombs blow up. This was one that was interesting to design because we came at it from the perspective. Some of the other ones we came at from like what would be a cool plastic piece we could do. What is the what is the physical componentry of this new objectives pack? Whereas Bombing Run actually started as what is the kind of objective that we'd like to see in the game? And there was a number of things we wanted to hit. Mainly, we wanted to give vehicles sort of an insubstantial advantage. What I mean is it doesn't specifically mention vehicles, but vehicles are generally going to be better at this objective. Because at the beginning of the game, you assign these bombs to some of your units, and those units are trying to get to an opponent's deployment zone. So it's not dissimilar from, say, your breakthrough, where you're just trying to get into your opponent's zone. But getting close and dropping it off and blowing it up is probably going to catch you in the explosion. And generally, a vehicle is going to care much less about an attack that, while it surges to crit, does not have any impact or anything. And also, if you have speeders, they're going to do a great job of zooming in and dropping off the bomb. So this is it. None of the objectives explicitly mention vehicles, but this one and also payload are both not trooper exclusive. Only troopers are going to be able to pick up a bomb that was dropped, but that's sort of an edge case anyways, since you start with each side's 3 bombs start on a vehicle, or not a vehicle, on a unit, and generally that's the unit that's going to take them, try and score with them. Hostage exchange, while it does have to be a trooper unit carrying the hostage, they're definitely going to be vulnerable to a lot of fire while they're trying to do so. And in that respect, having your vehicles sort of wade in and be the ones laying down fire gives them something to do as well, even though they're technically not scorers in that one. But Bombing Run in particular was like, hey, what would be an objective that like vehicles can definitely have a bit of a leg up on, can succeed at a bit better than troopers maybe.
Well, and it seems like generally with all of these objectives, you're creating situations where each force has to kind of go out of its what would be an entrenched position and like be forced to engage, which also
correct
to favor vehicles, because armor doesn't care about cover most of the time. So
that's true. Yes. Yep. Definitely. Yeah, and similar like with the hostage exchange, where a trooper if the hostage gets dropped, a trooper would have to run out of cover to go pick that up and bring it back across the board. And as I said, they're generally going to be being fought over or being dropped more sort of in the center, and that's generally not a very safe place to be. A vehicle, though, as you say, really it's not trying to hide behind a barricade. It can move up and sort of, especially like an ATST with a good, field of view, can sort of sit there and take, get close enough and then just take shots and try and hammer the unit that's trying to scoop up the hostage and run away with it.
So, so you're going to be at Adepticon, is that right?
I am, yes, and I'm super excited about it. I have not been to Adepticon before, so I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to, seeing a lot of Legion players who new and people I've seen before as well, previously at other tournaments.
Well, I certainly hope that you will come by the stream and see us.
I absolutely will. Yes, I am planning on it.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time, and we're all very excited about all this new stuff that's dropping in the near future. It seems like.
Yes, definitely. Yes, I'm glad to hear you are.
All right. Well, we will see you in a month or so at Adepticon.
Yes, looking forward to it. See you guys then. Will all of the Notorious Scoundrels be represented there at Adepticon?
We will.
Yeah. In fact,
yes.
the entire Fifth Trooper network. So the Scoundrels, Jay and Evan, and then also Mike and Zach from the blog all will be there. So
Yep.
That's awesome. That's awesome to hear.
yeah, we'll be we'll be holding down the stream in various capacities too, collectively. So
I mean, yeah, some of you guys got play too. So
well, actually, all of us have qualified, so we're
oh no.
yeah. So it's posed kind of a logistical issue.
Do you need me to run the stream while you guys play? Is that what this is?
If you're offering, yes.
All right, I'll see what I can do.
We certainly would not turn down a significant portion of guest commentary if you wanted to do that.
All right, sounds good.
All right, well, thanks, Luke.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yep. Super grateful to have you on, and we are the Notorious Scoundrels. I'm Kyle.
I'm Mike.
And that's David's drop that's going to go in there. And we'll see you next week.
Join us next week for another episode of The Notorious Scoundrels.
This has been a Fifth Trooper production.